la 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 la. Ay ya da 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 ya na 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 na. From Psalm 118 we read, "From out of distress I called to God. With abounding relief God answered me. The Lord is with me, I do not fear. What can man do to me? The Lord is with me among my helpers, and I will see the downfall of my enemies. It is better to rely on the Lord than to trust in man. It is better to rely on the Lord than to trust in nobles. All the nations surrounded me, but in the name of the Lord I will cut them down. They surrounded me, they encompassed me, but in the name of the Lord I will cut them down. They surrounded me like bees, yet they shall be extinguished like fiery thorns. In the name of the Lord I will cut them down. You, my foes, repeatedly pushed me to fall, but the Lord helped me. God is my strength and song, and he has been a help to me. The sound of rejoicing and deliverance reverberates in the tents of the righteous. The right hand of the Lord performs deeds of valor. The right hand of the Lord is exalted. The right hand of the Lord performs deeds of valor. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of God. God has indeed chastised me, but he did not give me up to death." I'm reading from Psalm 118. Why am I reading from Psalm 118? Because it's Rosh Chodesh Adar. A Chodesh Tov to you, my holy brothers and sisters. Happy new month of Adar. Happy new month of Adar. This is the month of joy, the month that contains Purim. And so on Rosh Chodesh Adar, like every Rosh Chodesh, we sing Hallel in the morning prayers. And Psalm 118 is part of Hallel. And the melody that I was humming so badly during the countdown was written by Baruch Chait. Amazing story. He's written so many songs that have become not just popular, but an institution in the Jewish world. And this particular melody was written where he was leading a kind of regular, singing thing in Baltimore. I mean, this is 40, 50 years ago at least. And there was a father who bring his son to this kumsitz, this regular kumsitz, where they would sing and share Torah. And and then the boy, told his story to Baruch after he'd been there several times. He said, I'm very ill. Or the father, I think, told this story. He said, my son is very ill, and he's in pain all the time, and he's probably dying. And the only thing that gives him comfort is your music. I mean, what a thing to say to Baruch Chait, to Rabbi Baruch Chait. And then the son said, Rabbi Chait, write me a song. I said, well, do you have a verse that you want, to be the subject of the song? And the boy said this verse here from Psalm 118. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of God. God has indeed chastised me, but it did not give me up to death. Open for me the gates of righteousness. I will enter them and praise God. Ay, ay, ay. Ay, da, 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 da. That melody just came down to Rabbi Chait at that moment, And I can't even, I'm such a bad singer, I can't remember the melody of the first part of that, but then when it breaks out into song, it's for the part, open for me the gates of righteousness, right? So it's kind of a slow build. I shall not die, but I shall live and recount the deeds of God. God has indeed chastised me, but he did not give me up to death. Open for me the gates of righteousness, I will enter them and praise God. Piskuli sharet tzedek avovaham oideyam. La 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 da ya da 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 da. I wish you had a teacher who was a good singer. And thank you, Bill. I mean, I'm not the worst in the world, but I can't do these songs justice at all. But yeah, I heard that story from Rabbi Chait directly, and it was... The hair stood up on our arms when he told that story. So hopefully I did it some amount of justice. How's everybody doing? We, in fact, have a daf today about teaching your children, looking out for the children and making sure they receive the education they need. Who's with us today? On a Tuesday, Rosh Chodesh Adar. Stephen in New Hampshire, John in Maine, Yehud in South Carolina, Sandy has Michigan in the house, Shandor in the Bronx, PK in Colorado, Bob in North Carolina, Renee in Indiana, Joe in Texas, Lucy in Minnesota, Bill in mid-Missouri, Bella in Florida, Larry in New York. Tom says good evening, Melissa in Great Neck, Lonnie in Florida. Clarice saying good evening. Ricky in crazy California. Yes. Randy in Florida. Please include Yaakov Ben Tova in your Mishaberak prayers. May Yaakov Ben Tova have a complete and speedy recovery. We say amen. Tom wishing everyone a Hodesh Tov. Patrice in Utah. Gisette in Colorado. And who else is over here on the YouTube side? God, what's going on? Aoife in Florida, Marie Maud in Freeport, Long Island, and Brandon in New York. Welcome, everybody. Great to have you with us. Okay, we're in Tractate Nazir, the 17th volume of the Talmud. These are the laws of Nazirus. We are in chapter 4. And today, continuing our discussion of Mishna number 5, which we read yesterday, in which we read that a father may make a vow of Nazirus on behalf of his minor son. His son who was a minor, not a legal adult, right? Pre-bar mitzvah. And then the son doesn't have to do it, right? The son, if he just indicates he doesn't want to do it, if he shaves his head, right? Or if he just says, no, I don't want to do it. No vow. Or even if other relatives say on behalf of the son, no, he doesn't want to do it. No vow. But if no one objects, if the son does not object, and the father has made this vow on behalf of the son, again, and the son does not object to it, then the son shall be bound by that vow. We learned also in the Mishnah that a mother cannot make that vow on behalf of her son. Only a father can. And then the whole idea is, well, why was this brought up in this Mishnah number 5? Kind of similar to the Mishnahs we were learning before, Mishnahs 3 and 4 of this chapter, that if the son, if the father, let's say, made that vow, and then, and then the son can just object at any time. But let's say that he even set aside animals for himself to bring, and then he objected. What happens to those animals? Can they still be brought as offerings? That's that same subject that we had, like when a wife is a Nazir, and then her husband nullifies her vow for her, what happens to those offerings? That was the context in which this was brought up. But now it's going to raise this very interesting problems of, can you vow on someone else's behalf, even if they're a minor? What's the difference between a father and a mother in this regard? What's the difference between a son and a daughter in this regard? Let us see. We pick this up at the bottom of page 28b, the Gemara on Mishnah number 5. So the Mishnah taught that a man can vow that his son should be a Nazir, but a woman, meaning a mother, cannot do so. So the Gemara asks, what is the reason for this? Now Rabbi Yochanan said, it is a halacha, a law transmitted to Moses from Mount Sinai with regard to a Nazir, meaning a father can vow Nazirus on behalf of his minor son. A mother cannot, as we'll see, a father cannot do this on behalf of his daughter, maybe, maybe not. And a man cannot make other kinds of vows on behalf of his son, right? He can't say on behalf of his son, okay, you're taking a vow that bananas are prohibited to you for 30 days. No, can't do that. A person can vow that bananas will be prohibited to him for 30 days, but you can't make such a vow on behalf of your minor son. you can make a vow of nazirus on behalf of your minor son. And how do we know that? Says Rabbi Yochanan, well, this was an oral law transmitted to Moses at Mount Sinai. We don't know exactly why this was done, just like we don't know why we can't eat meat and milk together, right? It's because God said so. And we should always remember that some of the oral Torah was transmitted to Moses at Sinai. Most of the rest of it, right, was derived by the rabbis from the written law. But there are some oral laws that were transmitted to Moses at Sinai kind of to get the process started, as it were. It's like a starter set of the oral law was given directly by God to Moses at Sinai. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan says this idea that a man can vow nazirus on behalf of his minor son, that's one of those halachas, transmitted orally to Moses at Mount Sinai. Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, said that Reish Lakish said, in disagreement with Rabbi Yochanan, no. The reason that a father can vow on behalf of his minor son about nazirus is not because that was transmitted at Mount Sinai, but rather because there is a logical reason, right? It's not that we have to just take that as a given, that God said so. Rather, there's a logical reason for it. Said Resh Lakish, the purpose is in order to educate his son in mitzvahs, right? Educate the son how to fulfill mitzvahs, commandments. And specifically this commandment, the commandment of nazirus. And the Gemara asks, well, if the purpose is to educate the son, well, then a mother should just as well be able to impose nazirus on her son for educational purposes. And the Gemara answers, Reish Lakish holds that a man is obligated to educate his son in the commandments, but a woman is not obligated to educate her son in the commandments. Can you guess what the law is on this topic? Is it like Rabbi Yochanan or like Reish Lakish? Right? If Reish Lakish disagrees both on the purpose of imposing this vow of nazirus and saying that the justification is because fathers are obligated to educate their sons but mothers are not, and Rabbi Yochanan said, regarding imposing this vow of nazirus on a minor son, that's a halacha Lemoshe Misinai, but the general educating your children in mitzvahs, why does he not use that justification? Because Rabbi Yochanan disagrees with Reish Lakish and holds that a father and a mother are equally obligated to educate their children in mitzvahs. And and with whom is the law in this question? Rabbi Yochanan, right? So a mother has the same obligation as a father to teach the children mitzvahs, right? Their Jewish children need to be educated how to be a Torah Jew, how to fulfill the commandments that Jews are obligated in. And a mother has the same obligation that a father has. Now the Gemara asks, granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said it is a halacha translated to Moses at Sinai, specifically on this particular law, nazirus, that a father can impose this vow on his son. So that a father on his son, yes, but with regard to his daughter, no, he cannot do so. And for whatever reason, that's the way the law was given at Sinai, right? That a father can impose that nazirus on his son. A mother cannot impose nazirus on a minor son. A father cannot impose nazirus on a minor daughter, and neither father nor mother can impose nazirus on a minor daughter. That is how it was given at Sinai. Okay, so that's just the way it was given. We can understand that. However, according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, if it's to educate the children, so a father should even be able to impose nazirus, a vow of nazirus, on his minor daughter, since he has to educate his daughter the same as he educate the son. Why does the Mishna specify a son? This is just according to the view of Reish Lakish, which is not the accepted law. But if we're trying to understand Reish Lakish's view, so why can't he impose, if it's for the purposes of education, so why can't we impose this same education on a daughter? Why does the Mishnah specify a son? And the Gemara answers that Reish Lakish would say a father is obligated to educate his son, but he is not obligated to educate his daughter. And for this reason, he cannot impose a vow of nazirus upon her. But the law follows Rabbi Yochanan in this. So the Gemara asks another question. Now, granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, right? So in other words, the law doesn't follow Reish Lakish. If indeed Reish Lakish believes that a father is obligated to educate his son in commandments and he's not obligated to educate his daughter in commandments, then his view wouldn't make sense. I guess it would make sense about obligating sons and not daughters. Why would Reish Lakish say that a father is not obligated to educate his daughters? That's not explained here, but neither is it the law. Right? So a father and a mother are both obligated to teach both a son and a daughter how to follow the commandments, particularly the commandments that apply to them. Now, so granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said that it is a law with regard to a Nazir, this is why the Mishnah indicates that with regard to nazirus, yes, a father can impose a vow upon his son. But with regard to other vows, no, he cannot do so. And that's the law. However, according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, who says that it is for the son's education, well, then why not impose other kinds of vows also? If we're trying to teach a son what the meaning of a vow is, what a vow of nazirus is, and what a konam vow is, right? To teach them what it means to say that something is going to be prohibited to me as if it were consecrated, and therefore I cannot make personal use of it. If we're only going to really be able to educate our children the meaning of such a vow by imposing such a vow on them, well then, and if the purpose of this is for education, why not impose other kinds of vows on them? Again, Rabbi Yochanan, and this is the accepted view, would say, well, no, you can't impose any vows on your minor son, except that there was an exception made by God about nazirus so that we can educate them in this specific vow which is spelled out in the Torah. Whereas other vows, it's just a general category of vows, but doesn't mention that, something specific to be prohibited like nazirus. But according to Reish Lakish, where it's just, the reason we can impose a vow of nazirus on a minor son is for the sake of his education, well, then why can't we impose other kinds of vows on the minor son as well? Why does the Mishnah specify nazirus according to the view of Reish Lakish? And the Gemara answers, sorry, my video had a glitch. Okay. So why does the Mishnah, our Mishnah, here number 5 in chapter 4, specify nazirus as something you can impose? So the Gemara answers, according to Reish Lakish, the Tana of our Mishnah is speaking utilizing the style of it is not necessary, meaning like this. It is not necessary to ask whether a father can impose regular vows of a mitzvah, where there is no deprivation of the son when he fulfills his father's vow. But even with regard to nazirus, where there is deprivation of his son, the son must refrain from wine and shaving. Even so, the father is obligated to educate him, and therefore he can vow in this manner too. So in other words, Reish Lakish would say, yeah, for the purposes of education, you can impose vows on a minor son. But Rabbi Yochanan disagreed, and we follow Rabbi Yochanan. Now the Gemara asks another question. Granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said it is a halacha transmitted to Moses from Mount Sinai with regard to educating your son about nazirus, that's why a father can impose such a vow on his minor son. So this explanation is consistent with that which the Mishnah teaches. If the son objected or relatives are objected on his behalf, the nazirus is canceled, as the transmitted halacha may be that the acquiescence of the relatives is necessary. That must be the way, God taught it to Moses. However, according to the view of Reish Lakish, as expressed by Rabbi Yosei, the son of Rabbi Hanina, who's bringing down Reish Lakish's view, that imposing such a vow on a minor son is not from a halacha transmitted to Moses at Sinai, but rather it's for the purpose of educating one's son. So then, is it really in the power of the relatives to say to the father, do not teach him mitzvahs, do not teach him commandments? How is it that the relatives can get in the way of a father educating his son about the commandments? And the Gemara, according to the view of Reish Lakish, and the Gemara answers, Reish Lakish holds that with regard to any education that is not important, for example, the optional mitzvah of nazirus, so the son is not amenable to the suffering that he must endure for this purpose, and therefore he or his relatives can object, even though it's for his benefit, for his education. Since it's a very difficult vow to fulfill, he can object, and even his relatives can object on his behalf. So the Gemara raises a further difficulty, granted according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said it is a halacha with regard to a Nazir transmitted at Mount Sinai, that it is due to that reason that the son must shave all his hair at the conclusion of his nazirus, despite the fact that he thereby performs rounding the corners of his head, in violation of the prohibition, you shall not round the corners of your heads. Now, since a halacha transmitted to Moses from Sinai has the status of a Torah law, right? That's the key. The oral laws are generally rabbinic enactments, and if they conflict in any way with a written Torah law, the Torah law overrides. But a halakha transmitted to Moses at Sinai, even if orally, has the same status as a written Torah law. So, what they're saying is a Nazir, at the conclusion of Nazirus, shaves his whole head. Now, you may have observed that my head appears to be shaved, but it is not, right? When, I get a haircut, it's with an electric trimmer, but a Jew is, prohibited to take like a straight razor over his head. A Nazir, at the conclusion of Nazirus, can shave his whole head. Even though when he does that, he will shave off the corners of his hair or the corners of the beard. Same idea, which is, what we talk about when like a Hasidic person grows payas, right? The payas are the corners of the hair, beard, right? And that are allowed to grow long. Modern Orthodox don't do that. There's many, very ultra-Orthodox Torah Jews who don't have payas. Chabad does not grow payas. But neither would they completely cut that and shave it off. A Nazir needs to shave off everything, and when he does that, he is rounding off the corners of the beard, which violates a Torah law. Now, when one Torah law conflicts with another, that's okay. Like, we're not allowed to wear wool and linen. But a priest serving in the temple, a high priest, does wear a combination of wool and linen. An exception was made in the written Torah with respect to that Torah law, so the priest is doing nothing wrong. Likewise, a Nazir is instructed to shave his whole head at the conclusion of Nazirus, so that overrides the Torah law to not round the corners of the beard. But if the reason that this minor son is becoming a Nazir is not really to fulfill a vow of Nazirus, but rather for educational purposes, which it would be for a rabbinic law, following a rabbinic law. How can one following a rabbinic law, right, taking this vow for educational purposes only, come and override the Torah law not to round the corners? So, in other words, this is yet another proof that the law must be like Rabbi Yochanan, that the father can impose Nazirus on the minor son by virtue of a law transmitted to Moses at Sinai, and we do not follow Reish Lakish that the father imposes that vow of Nazirus on his minor son just for educational purposes. So the Gemara continues its question. So according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, quoting Reish Lakish, that the reason for the vow of Nazirus takes effect on the minor son is in order to educate him in mitzvahs, and it applies only by rabbinic law. How does he explain the fact that this Nazir performs the rounding of the head? How does a Nazir, which is by rabbinic law, override the Torah prohibition on rounding the corners of the beard? And the Gemara answers, Reish Lakish holds that the rounding of the entire head is prohibited only by rabbinic law, as the Torah itself prohibited shaving only the corners of the head. And the mitzvah of education also applies by rabbinic law, that parents educate their children, that's by rabbinic law, right? It doesn't actually spell that out in the Torah. And therefore, the mitzvah of education, which is by rabbinic law, comes and overrides the prohibition against rounding the entire head, which likewise applies only by rabbinic law. The Torah just says don't round the corners. It's the rabbis who came and said you can't shave off the whole head with a razor. So the Gemara continues its question. So the Gemara continues along the same line. So granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said it is a halacha with regard to a Nazir, transmitted at Sinai, this is why when he shaves at the conclusion of the nazirus, he brings an offering. As the law is that the minor is a Nazir in all regards, which means once he's became a Nazir, at the conclusion of his nazirus, he has to bring the offerings that a Nazir brings. The sin offering, the burnt offering, and the peace offering. But if it's only for educational purposes, according to Reish Lakish, that the son is becoming a Nazir after his father vowed for him, then the offerings shouldn't be brought at the end, right? Because if his Nazir is not really a Nazirus, if it's just an educational Nazirus, then how can you bring offerings at the conclusion of that Nazirus? Right? However, according to the opinion of Reish Lakish, as expressed by Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Hanina, that the reason that this vow takes hold on the son is only by rabbinic law, because it's the obligation to educate him in mitzvahs. Therefore, his offering is not a Torah obligation, right? Even if he brings the offerings, it's only by rabbinic law, not by Torah law. And this means that he would bring non-sacred animals into the temple courtyard for slaughter. Because again, it's like educational offerings, not actual obligatory offerings. If the Nazirus itself, according to Reish Lakish, is an educational Nazirus. What would Reish Lakish answer? He would say that the prohibition against slaughtering non-sacred animals in the temple courtyard does not apply by Torah law, but it is also by rabbinic law, and therefore the prohibition is disregarded due to the importance of the son's education. He's going to have the full education, take on a vow of Nazirus, and bring the offerings at the end, according to Reish Lakish. So the Gemara challenges yet another way. Granted, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, who said it is a law from Sinai with regard to a Nazir, that is why when the son becomes ritually impure in the middle of his term of Nazirus, so he has to bring the offerings of impurity, and he can bring an offering of birds, and the priest may eat the bird sin offering that was killed by means of malika. Right, so if you bring bird offerings as opposed to goat or sheep or cow offerings, right? When you bring an offering of a sheep or a goat or a cow, when the temple is standing, and let's say you're bringing a sin offering, so then that mammal has to be slaughtered, shechted, according to the laws of ritual slaughter, right? It's at one smooth cut across the jugular and the esophagus, and all the blood is poured out on the ground, etc. It's a kosher slaughter, like all kosher animals that are eaten. It has to be slaughtered in a kosher manner. A bird offering, when it is brought in the temple, it's not shechted that way. A pigeon or a turtle dove, when it's brought as an offering to the altar, there's actually a specific way that the Torah says that the priest shall kill it, and it's actually using the thumbnail, which the priest would grow long, and it's called malika, and it's like the bird's neck is pinched. And that's not the way we slaughter other animals. For instance, when you eat a chicken, kosher chicken, it is slaughtered in the same way that a goat would be slaughtered, with that one smooth cut across the neck. But a turtle dove or a pigeon that's brought as an offering is not slaughtered that way. So here's the rest of the question. So according to Rabbi Yochanan, right, who says that this Nazirus of the son is, a law transmitted at Sinai, so then if he then becomes impure during that term and brings bird offerings, okay, so he's following a Torah law. He brings those offerings to the temple, and by Torah law, the priest performs malika on the bird. And then since parts of sin offerings are eaten by the priests, that priest is eating a valid offering, a valid sin offering, and everything is kosher. Everything's okay. However, according to the view of Reish Lakish, as brought down by Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Hanina, if that minor boy's Nazirus was imposed on him by his father, not by a law transmitted at Sinai, but rather by a rabbinic law of educating your son in the commandments, if he then becomes impure during his nazirus and he brings the bird offering to the temple, now that bird offering is being brought by rabbinic law, not by Torah law. And if the priest performs malika on that bird, he's going to violate the Torah law of eating an animal that isn't slaughtered in a kosher manner, where the malika was only by rabbinic law, not by Torah law. And so you're asking a priest to eat something that is prohibited to eat. He would be eating a nevela, an animal carcass, something that's slaughtered not in a kosher manner. So how can Reish Lakish say this? And the Gemara answers, Reish Lakish would say he holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who holds that the slaughter of a bird is not obligatory by Torah law. When the Torah says that you will shecht an animal, it's speaking about mammals. Mammals are shechted with that cut across the neck. Has nothing to do with birds. The extension of kosher slaughter to chickens and ducks and geese and other kinds of bird, that they should be slaughtered in the same manner as mammals, that is not a written Torah law. That's by rabbinic law. So if the son's nazirus is by rabbinic law and the malika of his bird offerings is by rabbinic law, then there's no conflict. Now the Gemara asks, and does Rabbi Yosef hold this opinion? But isn't it taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says, from where is it derived that the bird sin offering that comes due to uncertainty is not eaten? The verse states, and they who have an issue, whether male or a female, Leviticus 15:33, which juxtaposes a female to a male. Okay, so what they're doing now is they're going to digress a little bit. And they're saying, well, these bird offerings. Now that we're talking about bird offerings and whether their slaughter has to be kosher slaughter or not, right? If the bird is eaten, you would think it has to be a kosher slaughter even by rabbinic law, right? So malika is not kosher slaughter in any way. However, it is a process detailed in the Torah for bird offerings, right? So now what they're saying is, well, we have a bird offering that is brought in cases of uncertainty, which maybe wasn't detailed in the Torah, and it actually became an offering brought by rabbinic enactment to cover situations that are spelled out in the written Torah. But since it's a bird offering brought by rabbinic enactment, maybe it doesn't get eaten like other sin offerings do. And maybe the reason is because it's a rabbinic offering and we don't want it to override the Torah law against eating something that isn't slaughtered properly. So that's what they're examining here. So there's this, this bird sin offering that's brought in cases of uncertainty, whether you actually need to bring it or not. And so people who have this issue, whether a male or a female, that's what it says, Leviticus 15:33, right? Whether a man is bringing this bird of uncertainty or a woman is bringing it. Now, just as a male brings an offering for a definite sin, i.e. for a transgression that he committed inadvertently, but he knows he did it, so too, a woman brings an offering for a definite sin. And just as a male brings meaning she knows that she did it inadvertently, but she knows that she did it. Same as men. And just as a man brings a provisional guilt offering for his uncertain transgression, he's not sure whether he did it or not, so too a woman brings an offering for her case of uncertainty. And furthermore, just as a man brings an animal for his uncertain transgression, a ram as a guilt offering, from the same type from which he brings a definite sin offering, an animal sin offering, so too a woman brings the same type for her case of uncertainty, from the same type from which she brings a definite offering, i.e. a bird, if she is a zava or she gave birth. Right? These are procedural sin offerings. And this leads to the following question. If so, one can continue this line of thought. Just as a male brings an offering and it is eaten, so too a female brings an offering and it should be eaten when she sacrifices an offering for uncertain childbirth, right? Like she may have, had a stillborn, and it's unclear whether it was a stillborn or it was born alive and then died. So with regard to this case, you say, now we're on 29b, No, you cannot make this claim, because if you say that this is true with regard to a male, when bringing his offering involves only one uncertain prohibition, i.e., that he might be bringing non-sacred animals into the temple courtyard, shall you also say that this is the case with regard to a woman, whose case includes two prohibitions? And this concludes the Baraisa. And the Gemara asks, what are these two prohibitions? Are they not the prohibition against consuming unslaughtered animal carcass by eating a bird killed by Malika, right? Which is valid if it's a valid Torah-based sin offering, but it would not be valid to eat it if it was an offering brought by rabbinic law. And also the prohibition against bringing non-sacred animals into the temple courtyard. Again, if the nazirus is a proper nazirus by Torah law, then the bird offering that's brought when you become impure is also by Torah law. But if the nazirus is actually just educational nazirus, then any offering that he brings, because he becomes impure in the midst of that nazirus, is also by rabbinic law. And would a rabbinic law come and override the Torah law against bringing non-sacred animals? What do you mean non-sacred? This is brought as an offering, but it's brought by rabbinic law. By Torah law, he wouldn't be bringing that offering at all. So this shows that the prohibition against bringing non-sacred animals into the temple courtyard applies by Torah law, according to the opinion of Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda. So Rav Acha, the son of Rav Ika, objects to this. And perhaps one is not liable for these prohibitions by Torah law. Rather, the Baraisa means that one is liable for this because it appears like two Torah prohibitions, although they actually apply only by rabbinic law. And then we just leave that discussion behind. And we come back to the question of whether the ruling that a man can impose nazirus on his son is a law transmitted to Moses at Sinai, or whether it is part of the boy's education. Right? The same disagreement between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Now let us say that this is parallel to a dispute between two other Tanaim, two other rabbis of the Mishnah, as it is taught. Until when can a father make this vow that his son is a Nazir? Right? We've said all along now that according to Rabbi Yochanan, it was a law transmitted to Moses at Sinai that a father can impose a vow of Nazirus on his minor son. Now, the son can object and say no, and then there is no vow. So it's not that he impose, against the son's will. But the father can make that vow on behalf of the son. If the son doesn't object, then he's bound by it. Whereas normally you can't make a vow for anyone else, right? So he makes the vow on his son's behalf, and if the son doesn't object, the son becomes bound by this vow. Now, we've said all along that applies to a minor son. What is a minor? So you would think, well, a minor just means he hasn't had his bar mitzvah yet. That's actually the wrong definition for this situation.
Just realized you never did the candle.
Let's light up the darkness. Thank you, Nina. Okay, so you would think it just means a minor that hasn't had his bar mitzvah yet, but that would actually be an incorrect definition for this law. That's what we're going to examine now. So as it is taught, until when can a father vow that his son should be a Nazir? It is until the son develops two hairs, meaning, that a boy starts to have hair down there, right? That's when he starts to become, when he hits puberty. In other words, when he hits puberty. And it's until then that the father can make this vow. Once the boy hits puberty, no. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, right? Rebbe, the redactor of the Mishnah. Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, says it is until he reaches the age of vows, which is usually approximately a year earlier than hitting puberty. Right? So a boy doesn't become bound by all the mitzvahs until his 13th birthday. But he can be bound by vows earlier than that, right? If he reaches puberty before that, maybe that's when he can start being bound by vows. Or actually, there's this other view that as soon as a boy can understand what a vow is, he can be bound by a vow, right? So, children are going to understand what a vow is quite a bit earlier. They're going to sort of offer as a definition, sounds like it's going to be, maybe at the age of 11, the age of 12. right? So is it when he hits puberty that the father can no longer create this vow of nazirus for the son? Or is it when the son can understand what a vow is on his own, that the father can no longer impose the vow of nazirus on his son? Which is it? So what is it not the case that this is a dispute between Tanaim, as Rabbi Yehuda Nasi holds, that it is a law transmitted to Moses from Sinai with regard to a Nazir, and therefore, even though the son has already reached the age of vows and is capable of making his own decision with regard to the vow, this law states that the father continues to vow for him until he reaches puberty, develops 2 hairs. And Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who says that the father can vow for the son only until he reaches the age of vows, holds that he imposes a vow on his son. Why? In order to educate him in the mitzvahs, like Reish Lakish holds. And since the son has left the father's supervision to the degree that he can utter his own vows, the father is no longer obligated to educate him in this area of Jewish law. But the Gemara rejects this view. No, this dispute between Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, about until when they can impose those vows, is not the same as the dispute between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about the origin, the source of why a father can impose such a vow on his son. It's not the same dispute. The sages say, no, this is not the correct explanation of that dispute, as one can say that everyone, both Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi and Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, agree with Rabbi Yochanan that it is a law with regard to a Nazir transmitted to Moses at Sinai. And here they disagree with regard to the issue of a minor 1 year before he or she reaches majority. In other words, they dispute the case of a child who utters a vow when he is almost mature, on the verge of puberty. It is an accepted halakha that the vow of this child is valid if he understands its meaning. The dispute concerns the source of this law. Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, holds that the status of a minor 1 year before he or she reaches majority applies by rabbinic law. And therefore, the halacha by Torah law that a father can vow on behalf of his son comes and overrides the decree that one who is near the age of maturity is considered an independent adult with respect to vows, which is by rabbinic law. And Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, holds that the status of a minor 1 year before he or she reaches majority applies by Torah law. Consequently, the law that a father can vow on behalf of his son does not apply to this case. And if you wish, say that everyone agrees that a father vows for his son in order to educate him in mitzvahs, which means it is by rabbinic law. And likewise, the status of a minor 1 year before he or she reaches majority is also by rabbinic law. So in that case, the Tanaim, Rebbe and Rabbi Yosef, dispute the following. Rabbi Yehuda Nasi, Rebbe, holds that the mitzvah of education, which applies by rabbinic law, comes and overrides the status of a minor 1 year before he or she reaches majority, which is also by rabbinic law. And Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rabbi Yehuda, who said that a father can vow for his son only until he reaches the age of vows, holds that the mitzvah of education by rabbinic law does not come and override the status of a minor 1 year before he or she reaches majority. Consequently, there is no necessary connection between this dispute of the Tanaim and the argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish as to whether the ruling that a father can impose nazirus on his son is a law transmitted to Moses from Mount Sinai, or if it is an educational tool. That's where we're going to leave off. Tomorrow, when we pick it up, and we have a very short page tomorrow, so we'll just do this incident that is brought about Rabbi Hanina when he was a minor and he was brought before Rabban Gamliel to see if his father could impose this vow on him or not. And that story has a bit of a surprising outcome. So tune in tomorrow for the incident that illustrates this law about a father can impose a vow of nazirus on his minor son. That is the law, but he cannot impose other vows on his minor son. A mother cannot impose a vow of nazirus on the minor son because that's not the way it was transmitted at Sinai, but a father can. Okay, Let's see if there are questions or comments. Tom, I presume there was a general holding that daughters should learn the law specific to women from their mothers. Right, but let's say that tragically, God forbid, a daughter loses her mother, right? So then the father is certainly obligated to teach her the halachas that apply to Jewish women. Just like if a boy loses his father, his mother is obligated to teach him the laws that pertain to him. And as we saw, both fathers and mothers are obligated to educate their sons and daughters about the halachas, the mitzvahs that apply to them. Ifa, even if the mother was not obligated to teach mitzvahs to her children, why is that used to disallow her from doing so should she wish to do so? Not. First of all, I like the way you worded your question, Ifa, even if she was not obligated, right? So she is obligated. But if, according to Reish Lakish, she's not obligated, why would the lack of being obligated to do something come and say you're prohibited to make that teaching, right? And the answer would be, no. She may, even if she, according to Reish Lakish, she's not obligated to teach her son, she is certainly permitted to teach her son. What we won't allow, or what I guess Reish Lakish would not allow, right, is that you're going to vow for another. Since that's always prohibited, making vows on behalf of another person, there's a special case of we override the normal prohibition against making vows on behalf of another individual for the case of a father educating his son about this particular vow. So why don't we say, well, then the mother should be allowed also? Rabbi Yochanan would say it just wasn't transmitted that way. Reish Lakish would say he has to sort of do a backflip to get to where you're going, right? But that's why the law doesn't follow Reish Lakish in this regard. Sharon, how does Samson fit into this teaching? His mother made a vow of nazirus for him before he was even born. I don't know. On the one hand, you might say, well, this was before all the rabbinic enactments came. But if this was a law transmitted to Moses at Sinai, well, Samson lived much closer to that event than the sages did. And if his mother was able to do that, I'm guessing that the mother withheld, she just didn't allow him. She acted as if he was a Nazir by not shaving him and withholding wine from him while he was young and in her control. And then when he became an adult, right, he undertook the vow himself. I'm guessing that's how they would understand it, but I'm not sure. And I'm pretty sure we're going to encounter that story later in this volume. But it's a great question, Sharon. Jonathan, maybe one of the things we are teaching the boy is that this is hard and really not something you should romanticize and shouldn't be done when you are older. Just so, right? That's exactly what they're trying to teach. As we know, the sages discourage anyone from taking a vow of nazirus, even though there's a mechanism of nazirus in the written Torah. And Jonathan is saying we are educating him. This is hard to do and difficult and problematic, and that's why you shouldn't do it. And not only that, it is somewhat sinful. Jonathan was paying attention the other day, right? You would think that you can take a vow of nazirus. How could you say it's a sin to take a vow of nazirus? That was the view of Rabbi Lazar HaKapar, right? And that's why sin offerings are included in the procedural offerings at the termination of nazirus. Why is there a sin offering included in that? Because it's somewhat sinful to take a vow that deprives you of something that is otherwise permitted to you and even associated with joy, right? Wine is associated with joy. Wine is associated with making kiddush on Friday nights. So to deprive yourself of that is somewhat sinful. Plus, you have to shave your head at the end of it, right? And so, as Jonathan is saying, this is just yet another reason why we're educating the son that now that it's almost like the father who catches his kid smoking a cigarette and makes him smoke a whole pack of cigarettes until he's vomiting and he's so disgusted with cigarettes that he'll never smoke again, right? That kind of educational idea. And of course, says Jonathan, you run the risk of teaching that it is a good thing that you should seek, right? If you don't get the message across properly. Another thought, some children don't like to say no to their parents. So it makes sense that there is an escape valve for other relatives to communicate that the vow is not good for this child. Agreed, right? And if you really think about it, and this is why they're saying that the father can impose this vow, because, the kid can object, and a relative can object on his behalf. But realistically speaking, it probably is pretty unusual for a child who's in awe of his father, who's telling him that this is something you're learning, so that you can fulfill commandments properly, that the child is going to step up and say no. Probably doesn't happen that often. And maybe the relatives don't even know that the father is, having this educational process with the son, that he's making him a Nazir for 30 days. Why would other relatives even know that that's happening in order to, raise that objection? So, if indeed, the point is that maybe you should, it's enough to teach the child with words, hey, nazirus is not good, don't do this. But some people took upon themselves to impose that vow and take the kid through the whole process. So at least he did it once, and then hopefully he learned, not a good idea, don't do it again. Okay, that's what we've got for us today. Tomorrow we'll do page 30, very short daf, and we'll start off with this incident about when Rabbi Hanina was young and his father taught him impose on him a vow of Nazir. So we'll see how it actually worked out in the Talmudic era. Have a good night. And Chodesh Tov, a good Chodesh. Have a great, beautiful, joy-filled, joy-drenched month of Adar.